Chapter 3, over northern India, March 29, 1996, 30,000 feet. Speaking abruptly, I gave them a parable. I said, "It's the planet Neptune I'm talking about. Just plain ordinary Neptune, not paradise, because I don't happen to know about paradise. So you see, this means you, nothing more, just you." Now there happens to be a big spot of rock, I said, up there, and I must warn you that people are pretty stupid up in Neptune, chiefly because they each lived tied up in their own string. And some of them, whom I had wanted to mention in particular, some of them had got themselves absolutely determined about that mountain. You wouldn't believe it, I said. Life or death, use or no use, these people had got the habit, and they now spent their spare time and all their energies in chasing the clouds of their own glory up and down all the steepest faces in the district. And one and all they came back uplifted. And well they might, I said, for it was amusing that even in Neptune, most of them made shift to chase themselves pretty safely up the easier faces. But anyhow, there was uplift, and indeed it was observable, both in the resolute set of their faces and in the gratification that shone in their eyes. And as I had pointed out, this was in Neptune, not paradise, where it may be there perhaps is nothing else to be done. John Menlove Edwards, Letter from a Man. 2 hours into Thai Air Flight 311 from Bangkok to Kathmandu, I left my seat and walked to the rear of the airplane. Near the bank of lavatories on the starboard side, I crouched to peer through a small waist-level window, hoping to catch a glimpse of some mountains. I was not disappointed. There, raking the horizon, stood the jagged incisors of the Himalaya. I stayed at the window for the rest of the flight, spellbound, hunkered over a trash bag full of empty soda cans and half-eaten meals, my face pressed against the cold plexiglass. Immediately I recognized the huge sprawling bulk of Kanchenjunga. At 28,169 feet above sea level, the third highest mountain on Earth. 15 minutes later, Makalu, the world's fifth highest peak, came into view. And then finally the unmistakable profile of Everest itself. The ink-black wedge of the summit pyramid stood out in stark relief, towering over the surrounding ridges. Thrust high into the jet stream, the mountain ripped a visible gash in the 120-knot hurricane, sending forth a plume of ice crystals that trailed to the east like a long silk scarf. As I gazed across the sky at this contrail, it occurred to me that the top of Everest was precisely the same height as the pressurized jet bearing me through the heavens. That I proposed to climb to the cruising altitude of an Airbus 300 jetliner struck me at that moment as preposterous or worse. My palms felt clammy. 40 minutes later, I was on the ground in Kathmandu. As I walked into the airport lobby, after clearing customs, a big-boned, clean-shaven young man took note of my two huge duffels and approached. "Would you be John, then?" he inquired in a lilting New Zealand accent, glancing at a sheet of photocopied passport photos depicting Rob Hall's clients. He shook my hand and introduced himself as Andy Harris, one of Hall's guides, come to deliver me to our hotel. Harris, who was 31, said there was supposed to be another client arriving on the same flight from Bangkok, a 53-year-old attorney from Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, named Lou Kosishki. It ended up taking an hour for Kosishki to locate his bags. So while we waited, Andy and I compared notes on some hard climbs we'd both survived in Western Canada and discussed the merits of skiing versus snowboarding. Andy's palpable hunger for climbing, his unalloyed enthusiasm for the mountains, made me wistful for the period in my own life when climbing was the most important thing imaginable, when I charted the course of my existence in terms of mountains I'd ascended and those I hoped one day to ascend. Just before Kosishka, a tall, athletic, silver-haired man with patrician reserve, emerged from the airport customs queue, I asked Andy how many times he'd been on Everest. "Actually," he confessed cheerfully, "this will be my first time, same as you. It should be interesting to see how I do up there." Hall had booked us at the Garuda Hotel, a friendly, funky establishment in the heart of Tamil, Kathmandu's frenetic tourist district, on a narrow avenue choked with cycle rickshaws and street hustlers. The Garuda has long been popular with expeditions bound for the Himalaya, and its walls were covered with signed photographs of famous alpinists who'd slept there over the years. Reinhold Messner, Peter Habeler, Kitty Calhoun, John Roskelley, Jeff Lowe. Ascending the stairs to my room, I passed a large four-color poster titled Himalayan Trilogy, depicting Everest, K2, and Lhotse, the planet's highest, second highest, and fourth highest mountains, respectively. Superimposed against the images of these peaks, the poster showed a grinning, bearded man in full alpine regalia. A caption identified this climber as Rob Hall. The poster, intended to drum up business for Hall's guiding company, Adventure Consultants, commemorated his rather impressive feat of ascending all three peaks during 2 months in 1994. An hour later, I met Hall in the flesh. He stood 6'3" or 4" and was skinny as a pole. There was something cherubic about his face, yet he looked older than his 35 years. Perhaps it was the sharply etched creases at the corners of his eyes, or the air of authority he projected. He was dressed in a Hawaiian shirt and faded Levi's patched on one knee with an embroidered yin-yang symbol. An unruly thatch of brown hair corkscrewed across his forehead. His shrub-like beard was in need of a trim. Gregarious by nature, Hall proved to be a skillful raconteur with a caustic Kiwi wit. Launching into a long story involving a French tourist, a Buddhist monk, and a particularly shaggy yak, Hall delivered the punchline with an impish squint, paused a beat for effect, then threw his head back in a booming, contagious laugh, unable to contain his delight in his own yarn. I liked him immediately. Hall was born into a working-class Catholic family in Christchurch, New Zealand, the youngest of 9 children. Although he had a quick, scientific mind, at the age of 15 he dropped out of school after butting heads with an especially autocratic teacher, and in 1976 he went to work for Alp Sports, a local manufacturer of climbing equipment. He started out doing odd jobs, working a sewing machine, things like that. Remembers Bill Atkinson, now an accomplished climber and guide, who also worked at Alp Sports at the time. But because of Rob's impressive organizational skills, which were apparent even when he was 16 and 17, he was soon running the entire production side of the company. Hall had for some years been an avid hill walker. About the same time he went to work for Alp Sports, he took up rock and ice climbing as well. He was a fast learner, says Atkinson, who became Hall's most frequent climbing partner, with the ability to soak up skills and attitudes from anybody. In 1980, when Hall was 19, he joined an expedition that climbed the demanding North Ridge of Ama Dablam, a 22,294-foot peak of incomparable beauty 15 miles south of Everest. During that trip, Hall's first to the Himalaya, he made a side excursion to Everest Base Camp and resolved that one day he would climb the world's highest mountain. It required 10 years and 3 attempts, but in May 1990, Hall finally reached the summit of Everest as the leader of an expedition that included Peter Hillary, the son of Sir Edmund. On the summit, Hall and Hillary made a radio transmission that was broadcast live throughout New Zealand, and at 29,028 feet received congratulations from Prime Minister Geoffrey Palmer. By this time, Hall was a full-time professional climber. Like most of his peers, he sought funding from corporate sponsors to pay for his expensive Himalayan expeditions, and he was savvy enough to understand that the more attention he got from the news media, the easier it would be to coax corporations to open their checkbooks. As it happened, he proved to be extremely adept at getting his name into print and his mug on the telly. Yeah, Atkinson allows, Rob always did have a bit of a flair for publicity. In 1988, a guide from Auckland named Gary Ball became Hall's primary climbing partner and closest friend. Ball reached the summit of Everest with Hall in 1990, and soon after returning to New Zealand, they concocted a scheme to climb the highest summits on each of the 7 continents, a la Dick Bass, but to raise the bar by doing all 7 of them in 7 months. With Everest, the most difficult of the septet, already taken care of, Hall and Ball wrangled backing from a big electrical utility, PowerBuild, and were on their way. On December 12, 1990, mere hours before their 7-month deadline was due to expire, they reached the crest of the 7th summit, the Vinson Massif, at 16,067 feet, the highest point in Antarctica, to considerable fanfare throughout their homeland. Despite their success, Hall and Ball were concerned about their long-term prospects in the professional climbing racket. To continue receiving sponsorship from companies, explains Atkinson, a climber has to keep upping the ante. The next climb has to be harder and more spectacular than the last. It becomes an ever-tightening spiral. Eventually, you're not up to the challenge anymore. Rob and Gary understood that sooner or later they wouldn't be up to performing at the cutting edge, or they'd have an unlucky accident and get killed.